records of Estonian language, Estonian songs, are from about 1,000 years ago. So the language has relatively long history, and even these songs from 1,000 years ago, the language has changed, but not very much. So basically we can still read them and understand them. The language is, it's one of the few European languages which is not part of, it's not a Germanic language, it's not Roman language, it's not Slavic language, it's a part of a completely different group of languages which are called Finno-Ugric languages. And it is related to only two bigger languages in Europe, which are Finnish and Hungarian. And then there are some smaller related languages to the east. It's quite a complicated language. It, I think, is what is, I believe, what is in linguistics called a synthetic language, which means the words can take many endings, and we have a complicated case system. We have 14 cases. So you can, to some extent, pile up additional meanings to the word by adding some like suffixes to it. For example, I could, there is a word minu, which means my. If I add to that minuga, that means with me, and if I add gi at the end, minuga gi, it would mean even with me, or also with me, and so on. So it has this deep and long history, and I believe history is always embedded in the language, even if we don't consciously always think of that or are aware of that. And I think poetry is a perfect medium for expressing that, for bringing out these layers that are there in language, how certain meanings have maybe developed or changed, or the journey that the words or the language has passed through.
Actually, it's very interesting to see that your national epic, Kalevi Poet, the son of Kalev. So it was a part of a nation building endeavor actually during the 19th century. So you have the first, means you have the constructed epic actually for the purpose of nation building. We have Mahabharata, all those epics are just like orally transmitted throughout the ages, but you have constructed it. So means, what do you feel about this construction of nationalism, the Estonian nationalism, and is there any connection between Kalevi Poet and this Estonian nationality?
Well, indeed, again, the epic itself must have existed long before. There are many connecting points between our epic and, for example, the Finnish epic, Kalevala. Even the title is almost the same. And some stories, you know, coincide in there, or at least they have like certain meeting points between them. And this was indeed made into a written text in the middle of the 19th century, compiled from where it could be, from the sources where it still existed in some form. Generally, I think, you know, Estonian literature in some ways has, literature or contemporary culture in general has two beginning points. One is this, what I actually mentioned, old folk songs from about 1,000 years ago, and I think they have influence on, at least on Estonian literature to this day. For example, the old folk songs, and also a good part of Kalevi Poet, the national epic, they use rhyme, but they don't use the end rhyme, but they use the, well, what is called the alliteration, the beginning rhyme. So the first letter or the first syllable repeats itself, not the end of the word. So this is something which still finds its way into Estonian poetry today, but even to our common talk. We are very keen to use expressions which repeat the initial letter or initial sound. So this is in some ways one beginning, and the other is from the mid-19th century, when it was actually to a good extent by German people who had lived sometimes already for several generations in Estonia or in the Baltics, who started promoting the Estonian own writing and own culture. So also this epic was compiled into a written form, but it's by somebody who was by nationality German, but who felt very close to the land and its tradition, which is an interesting point in itself, in maybe in some ways, how the land can be so important that we identify ourselves with it more than maybe our former, I don't know, heritage or like genetic heritage. Anyhow, I think the fact of the national epic being compiled probably gave people assurance that that we actually have a long history and we actually have a national identity. It's not just some, folklore, but it's a reality. And the other thing which happened more or less at the same time, a little bit later maybe, but quite close to that. I believe the first occasion was in 1869. Our famous, or I don't know how famous, if you've heard of them, but our relatively famous choir festivals, where people come together and they sing. They come together as a choir and they sing, songs about our land, our country, our tradition, but also just some songs which we feel close to. And this was another thing which I believe helped form our national identity, or at least the contemporary national identity, very much. And this tradition has been ongoing to this day. Actually, there will be another. The festival happens now every 6 years, and actually the next festival will take place this year in the summer. So if you're interested, you're welcome to. You have the chance this year to attend one. And this song tradition was very instrumental, also to our regaining of independence formally in 1991, but also actually a couple of years before that we have been always singing for our freedom.
So when we just call about India, we call it our motherland. But for Estonian people, I think it's fatherland. It's quite interesting. What do you say?
I've thought about it in different languages. Indeed, in some languages it's the fatherland, in some languages it's the motherland. Yeah, we say Isamaa, which would be the fatherland, but at the same time, when we talk about, what you would in English probably say, Mother Nature, we say the mother land or the Mother Earth. The land and earth would be the same word in Estonian. I don't know how it's come about, but it is true. And at the same time, we have we have our famous river Emajõgi, which is the name of the river is Mother. So in some ways we have the both sides in our landscape. Of course, another interesting, maybe you asked about Estonian language, another interesting thing about Estonian language is that we have no gender. We have no grammatical gender, but we also have no like differentiation between he or she. So, I mean, you can talk about a man and a woman, but just grammatically, it's the same. So maybe it somehow has an influence or on our consciousness.
So we are actually waiting for your Estonian poems here. So would you please read one poem?
Sure. So I'll read part of a poem which is called Time. I'll read the first part in Estonian. Joy will read Assamese and then I'll read the other part in English. Aeg. Vahel, kui istun silmad vidukil, märkan silmanurgast, et hoian pihus kääre, mis hakivad aega värvilisteks paberiribadeks. Aeg on ribadeks lõigatud olemine, ütlen siis. Vahel, kui silmad sulen, tean, et teine pool minust kleebib värvilisi paberiribasid puudeks ja järvedeks ja päikesekollasteks kodudeks. Ja siis ei ütle ma midagi.
The first word, in Assamese, it is homoi. It is dedicated to his grandmother. কেতিয়াবা যেতিয়া মই কেৰাহীকৈ চাওঁ, মই মুখ দেখো কেঁচিখন হাতত লৈ কাটি থকা সময়ক কাগজৰ ৰঙীন টুকুৰাবোৰলৈ। সময় এডোখৰ চিগা ধৰণৰ অস্তিত্ব, মই কওঁ নিজকে। কেতিয়াবা যেতিয়া মই চকুমুদি দিওঁ, মই সজাগ হৈ আৱিষ্কাৰ কৰোঁ যে মোৰ আধাখিনিয়ে সদায় আঠা লগাই আছিল কাগজৰ ৰঙীন টুকুৰাবোৰ। গছবোৰৰ বাবে, ৰথবোৰৰ বাবে আৰু ৰ'দ খাই ঘৰবোৰৰ বাবে। সেই সময়বোৰত মই মৌন হৈ থাকোঁ।
And part 2. To dive, to write something. Life is a river under an old railway bridge, a broken echo of memories flooding the fields around it. Lihula, Tuudi, Grandma's backyard, Grandma who buried her son before he was 9 months old and was then left sitting under other people's lilacs. A girl on her knee, eyes in the distance. Once her husband had been deported to Siberia. Where will I go? Or another memory. Boys passing their summer, forgetful that there is time and not just timelessness. Boys in their first bout of craving, racing their bikes down the street to where the sun is but a blinding orb. To dive, for the river is deep. I was there just recently. Grandma is dead now, but the railway bridge is still there. Grandma's street is still there. And at its end, the sun is still a blinding orb.
পানীলৈ জাপ দিয়া, কিবা লিখা, জীৱন এখনি নৈ, পুৰণি ৰেলৰ দলং এখনৰ তলৰ, চৌপাশৰ পথাৰবোৰ, বুঢ়াই থাকে সোঁৱৰণিৰ ভগা প্ৰতিধ্বনি এটাৰ বানে। লিহুলা, তুতি, আইতাৰ পিছ চোতাল, আইতা, যিয়ে কবৰ দিছিল তেওঁৰ পোক, সি 9 মহীয়া হোৱাৰ আগেয়ে, আৰু এৰি থৈ আহিছিল আন মানুহৰ লাইলাকবোৰৰ তলত। আঁঠুকাৰি বহি এজনী ছোৱালী, দূৰৈত তাইৰ চকু। এবাৰ চাইবেৰিয়ালৈ নিৰ্বাসিত কৰা হৈছিল তাইৰ মানুহটোক। কলৈ যাম মই? নাইবা আন এটি স্মৃতি। ল'ৰাহঁতে গ্ৰীষ্মৰ দিনকেইটা কটাইছিল দূৰৈৰ ক'ৰবাত, পাহৰি যে সময়ো থাকে, কেৱল সময়বিহীনতাই নহয়। ব্যভিচাৰৰ প্ৰথমটো পাল্লাত ল'ৰাহঁতে উদ্ভ্ৰান্ত হৈ চলাইছিল সিহঁতৰ বাইকবোৰ সেইপিনে, য'ত সূৰ্যটো মাথো এটা অন্ধকৰা গোলক। জাপ দিয়া, নৈখন দ। মই অলপতে তাত আছিলোঁ। আইতা এতিয়া নাই, কিন্তু ৰেলৰ দলংখন এতিয়াও আছে তাত। আইতাৰ ৰাস্তাটো এতিয়াও আছে তাত, আৰু তাৰ শেষত সূৰ্যটো এতিয়াও অন্ধকৰা এটা গোলক। সৰুকালিৰ নিচিনা মই এতিয়াও দেখা নাপাওঁ কোনপিনে, যলৈ মই গৈ আছোঁ। So, this title of this book, actually, this Assamese translation, it is taken from this particular poem, Lailakor Datir Homadhi. So now, coming to the other sets of your creativity, you have a novel also in Estonian. Tell me something about Iceberg, this one.
About the novel?
About the novel, the Estonian background, and how you actually wanted to explore in the novel.
Well, the world is changing all the time, isn't it? And when I was a child, I went to school in the capital city of Estonia, but all the time that was free from school, I spent with my grandmother in the countryside. And as many, many people did in that time in Estonia, I think one thing to say about Estonia is maybe that it has worked for most of its history until maybe very recent time, it has been predominantly rural culture. And countryside has been very important to us, or that has been our home, really. So when I wrote this book, which was about 10 years ago, I did it as a kind of homage to my grandparents and to their generation. I wanted to capture their life and their world, which was quickly disappearing. So it is basically a story about an old man, maybe very loosely molded after my grandfather. An old man who lives in a already nearly abandoned village. There are some people around, but they are far, so he's basically alone there. His family has passed, or those who remain live very far. But it is not really a book of grief, it is a book of appreciating having lived and looking back at one's life and appreciating the landscape around one, despite the difficult history, because for most of Estonia's history, actually, we have been occupied or invaded by somebody, and most recently from 1940 until 1991 by Soviet Russia or Soviet Union. So it was a difficult time for these people, and I think they found solace particularly in land, because the rule can change, but if the land is still there, then people can still be rooted to it, which I think the greatest crime maybe against identity, people's identity or nation's identity, is to destroy the land, because then they have little to return to, which is to some extent, I would say, unfortunately happening nowadays, in many places in Europe, but also in Estonia, though it's still it's still there. So anyhow, I told the story of that old man, of his last months over the harsh winter of Estonia in his remote house, and how he's looking back, and finally the passing is more like a relief. And funny thing about this book, which if I may share this, was that when the book came out, I did a series of launches of it in different parts of Estonia, particularly in more rural places and smaller places. And in one of the launches, the audience was mostly elderly people. And one of them asked me, well, what does this main character of yours, what does this old man, what does he eat in the winter if he's so isolated? And before I could answer, the other old lady said that, well, he must be baking bread and things. To which the one who asked the question, violently opposed to that. No, he's not that type, He's not the bread baking type. So I found it rewarding that the character had kind of developed further in the readers' minds, like they thought what he would be in different situations. But yes, this is the prose book. I'm quite proud of it, though. I am now in the process of writing another prose book. But actually, I just recently realized I cannot write prose. Even if I write 100 pages or 200 pages, I feel it's still poetry. I think of it, when I'm writing it, I think of it as poetry. And I think once you give your soul to poetry, you can't withdraw it anymore.
Yeah, Mathura, you are also a painter, an artist, and you have written lots about cinema also and other things, and you are also a radio presenter of Estonian National Radio Classic. So, what do you define yourself as a creative instinct? Differences of your creativity is there. So, how you just discover yourself in between all those things, as a poet, or a painter, or artist, or a performing artist? What would you like to discover yourself?
Well, I often think I do too much different things, but it is true. I have tried all these different things, and I even have a piano at home. I can't really play any tunes on it, but I still like the sound and touch of it. Well, I once argued with one of our esteemed writers that I thought that the creative impulse is always the same, or always one. It just finds different expressions. I think for me, creating is a way of, well, maybe two things. It's a way of communicating with the world. Even if nobody reads it, it's still, I am reflecting back. And the other thing I would say is that it is for me a way of making sense of the world, but even more maybe making sense of myself, often ending in the realization that you cannot make any final sense. It's actually more rewarding when some part of life will always be mystery. And maybe one of the struggles of our time is that we try to, in a way, over-explain things or find all the answers to everything, but is it really possible? I'm also thinking of Indian philosophy and Indian all the scriptures, Vedas and Puranas and so on, that when I first came in contact with them, then the people who introduced me to these works said to me that these are books which give all the answers. And I thought, okay, well, that's worth giving a shot. But I think one of my main realizations over the years is that it is far more important to find the questions than the answers, because even if you're given all the answers, if you don't know what they correspond to, then are they that much use to you? At the same time, if you have the question or you have the spirit of inquiry, you can always inquire further, because I think there is never exactly an end to that. And maybe last thing about this, I will say that I just now thought that the Indian, or at least the Vedic creation story is that the world starts with a sound. I mean, maybe there are different versions of it. I might not know them all, but like Brahma sitting in the lotus flower and hearing the two syllables tapa, that he should do austerity, and then after that he's creating this material world. So I think for me, all these things, writing, the radio work, music, maybe even to some extent painting, is connected to sound. I believe sound has the potential to contain a whole new world in a way. And often when I start a new painting, I write some name onto the canvas. Often, I'm actually quite often using some Sanskrit name. It will not be visible afterwards, but for myself, I feel that I'm giving the seed of that name or of that sound to the work, and almost like a dedication, even though it's invisible afterwards.
Yeah, that's great. Then coming to one thing, being an Indophile, what is your impression on India? Actually, I remember one sunny morning in Ragbhare, in your country, that I asked you one question, that which color would you prefer for India? Then you just replied that, yeah, it's white. So just tell us something about your impression.
Well, the more I come to India, I have the feeling that the less I understand it. So that's first thing. But yeah, I had forgotten it, but yesterday you reminded it to me. Maybe I am still of the same opinion, that because, when you take the color theory, if you're familiar with that, then if you mix all the colors together, you basically get white. And I can tell you have tried it. I thought it can't be possible, taking black and red and everything and then mix it together and you get white. But it is a fact, you get white. I mean, maybe not like pale white, it's maybe like a little bit creamy, maybe also depending on what paints exactly you use. But so maybe there is something in it which characterizes to me India, that it is certainly one of the great cradles of culture and of spirituality and tradition in the world. So if we take white as, like a clean sheet or like a clean beginning, but at the same time, there is so much variety and so much diversity, so many languages, so many cultures in India. So it's almost like having this original clean canvas at first, and then mixing all these things together there over time, and the final result is still the white. like you can. It's almost like how is the saying that, you know, the more you know, the more you understand that you know that what you don't know, so to say. So maybe it is in some ways a metaphor of that as well, that going through that big journey to come to the almost back to the initial point, but with a new experience, or like further experience.
And from Margus Latik to Mathura?
Well, I got interested in India many years ago through some acquaintances of mine who were particularly keen or particularly interested in the Bhakti tradition and Radha-Krishna worship in Estonia. But it is through these friends that I actually came to India, or like had my first interest or contact with one of the Indian traditions. And I must say, I never felt alien to that somehow. It was even strange that it very quickly, at least this Bhakti tradition, felt like something very understandable or very close to me. So over the years, I have studied it and I have engaged in it, and I have had my teachers, and one of them has given me this name, but as a writer, I actually started using it almost by accident, because before I became a poet, as a publishing poet, I was already writing a lot of song lyrics, which maybe explains also the musicality in my poetry. But anyhow, there was one. I have written over the years. I've written, I think, more than 100 songs, or like lyrics for the songs. But at that time, in my university days, there was particularly one composer I was writing for, and then he wanted to do some project where he would be sort of anonymous, or he would be hidden. And because we had worked a lot together before that already, then he asked me if I could also somehow hide myself. And because I had that name by that time, and many of my friends were calling me Mathura rather than Margus, and which is still true today. So it was an easy choice. I said, okay, I'll use that. And some of these songs were quite popular at the time. This is in the 90s. I don't know if people still, even in Estonia, if they remember them, but there were like a couple of most played songs of the year on the national radio. So I thought, okay, when the first book came out, that maybe I'll use the same name. And after that, I haven't been able to get rid of it. People tell me that, no, that's who you are. But maybe for the sound of it, I don't know, I find it beautiful, but of course it's also in some ways a reflection of my history with India.
So you have translated Ben Okri, you have translated Kuwar Narayan, the eminent Hindi poet. So I just wanted to ask you about Johann Leif, because the Estonian poetry cannot be imagined without the poems of Johann Leif. Will you share something about Johann Leif?
Yeah, he was one of our first national poets in the very early years of 20th century. His influence has been immense. Like, you cannot, I think there is hardly any poet in Estonia who haven't had some influence from him. Even though he was unrecognized, or almost unrecognized in his lifetime, and he died rather young. He has a certain quality to his poetry, which is that it's on the surface it's extremely simple, which makes it very hard to translate, because if you just translate the word it will maybe sound silly. But this simplicity comes with a lot of honesty, I feel, and like he goes straight to the issue. And there are some, like, I think every Estonian will know at least some part of some poem of Juhan Liiv. So he's a big figure. I'm not sure what you're particularly interested in him, but I mean, for me, maybe he in a way characterizes something which I find also interesting interesting and important in poetry, which is in some way simplicity, but not simplicity for simplicity's sake, but simplicity of the honesty or of realization. So I heard the previous speaker was speaking how he almost never edits the work. I'm afraid that I'm almost the opposite, that I often do a lot of editing, but I go sort of backwards. I don't try to make it more, but I try to edit out what is maybe not absolutely necessary. But maybe one day Vijay will render Juhan Liiv to Assamese readers, then you will have a better idea what I'm talking about.
So, from audience, any comment? Any question?
This is amazing. The amazing you have expressed yourself in tone and tune. It's like we are watching a movie. You narrated yourself in such a way, expression of all kinds of facility. It's amazing. That's it. We are very much proud of you all. And the way you are thinking India is really.
Thank you so much. This really means a lot. Yeah.
Any other remarks or comment? Yeah.
Very good afternoon and welcome to our land. I'm Rashmi Narzari. There is so much pain and so much emotion in your poems, the ones you have read and the ones that have been read out of the translation. And when we have heard about your novel as well, is it about your own grandparents? Because unless it's your own, I think you cannot evoke that much of pain and feelings in your writings. And if they are not your own, then you are amazing. Both ways you are amazing. So I just wanted to know if they are about your own grandparents. The bond is so amazing, yes. Thank you.
Thank you. The book is not 100% after, like, the characters are not precisely after anybody. My grandmother, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, in whose landscape I have more or less set the novel and the story, and which is also the landscape of this poem that we read. My maternal grandfather was also deported to Siberia when Estonia was occupied by Russians, or Soviet Russia or Russian Empire during the Second World War. And you know, the crimes that people were accused of were many times, they were completely ridiculous, or they were just made up. Like basically the accusation against my grandfather was that he wasn't as poor as some others, for example, he owned a horse, so this was like something very suspicious, that everybody had to be, I don't know, without anything almost. So when he was taken away, my mother was only 2 years old, and my mother says that the only, I mean, this will be a little emotional, but the only memory that she has of her father from that, or like from the time before that, is when the father was being taken away, and she had said that I want to be in his lap, which she couldn't. Well, my grandfather still came back after about 14 or 15 years, and actually they were very close with my mother. But it left a mark, and he wasn't. I mean, he passed away before his 70th birthday, so probably otherwise the life could have been longer. So, I mean, all of this isn't exactly in the book, but I took the feeling maybe of this history, and as I said, most of all, I wanted to make an homage to that generation for what they had been through, but that through that adversity, they had still kept our language and culture, and they had held it dear. I sometimes even think that nowadays, when we formally have the freedom, that people lose that appreciation for the things which actually are valuable. Or let me say like this, people forget that you actually have to fight for freedom in some ways every day, or there is no end point. It's not like one time you attain freedom and then that's it. It's of course, freedom has many levels, like political and personal and so on, but well, it is very good that there are such events like this, because it also reminds us that we need get-togethers, and we need association to all be aware that if we want to maintain our culture and our language, like there is Assamese language, but I understand here also people speak the local Bodo language. If we want to really maintain that from generation to generation and pass it on and have it flourish for an ongoing future, it doesn't happen by itself. It is always by our effort and, well, first of all, our understanding that it is important. So I think this is indirectly the feeling I have tried to capture in these poems, and particularly into this prose book. Yeah, well, thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Yeah.
Among the all the media that you express yourself, like painting, roadside novel, are you wanting to try to be quite clear? Once one Indian literature, I mean, Nobelitarian Bangla, she expressed that whatsoever cannot be written in prose, I write in poetry, and whatever it cannot be written in poetry, I write in prose. So may I know that what is your relation to this?
Well, at heart, I'm first of all a poet, but it is interesting to try these different mediums because they give different opportunities to express yourself. And, well, for example, the painting is very intuitive. You don't have to kind of bring something into words or give it, like, in that sense, give it a very specific shape. It can be. My painting is mostly abstract or half abstract, so it is sometimes good to switch my mind off and just let the hand, as was mentioned also, I think, as one of my book titles is a line flowing beneath the hand. so let the line flow instead of words. But poetry is really what captured me first and probably will remain with me last.
Yeah, thank you, Mathura, for being with us. What will be your takeaway from this Kokrajhar Literary Festival when you will be returning to Estonia? So,
well, I know I've taken up quite a lot of your time already, but just I want to mention one thing, that this Assamese book that we just launched here, actually the last poem in this book, it is a long poem of several parts. It's called River Cots or Cots. And I wrote this poem a few years ago when I did a writing residency in Kolkata, so it's about Bengal. But this is the first publishing of that poem. This poem hasn't been published yet, not in English, not in Estonian. The first print is in Assamese, which is nice. But what I want to say is that after I had written this poem, I was actually triggered, or I had some desire to explore the matter further and not, I mean, obviously this poem is about Ganga, but I had a desire to explore the rivers of India, or maybe also rivers in general, but particularly rivers in India further, and that was one of the reasons why I was very happy to come to Assam this time to see Brahmaputra, but also I understand just basically next to here, another river, Gaurang River, is flowing. So I don't know how it turns out, but my desire is to absorb that and to write about that. What I find also interesting is that in India, I don't know if all the rivers, but at least the big rivers, they are like personalities. They have names which are, Brahmaputra, the son of Brahma, or the Gaurang, the golden limbed, isn't it? The one who has golden limbs. So I always like to think of nature or natural phenomena like rivers as not something inanimate, but something which have personality and character. So I hope to gather some impressions in my brief time here, and I am thankful for listening to me and being here today and having me here. Thank you very much.
I think it was a nice session, and I thank everybody here for being with us to celebrate the Estonian poet, writer Mathura here in our soil. So with lots of memories, we will be going back to our own places. But I think as people, all of us are just alike, actually. We are the same, actually, and we have different sets in the form of different people. So thank you, everyone, for being with us, and the organizers also, the team Kokrajhar Literary Festival. I congratulate you all, and thank you. That's all.
We've come to the end of our session. I would like to thank our panelists Margus Latik and Dr. Bijay Shankar Burman for this engaging session on poetry, culture, language, and folklore. We are honored by your insightful and observant thoughts on India. Thank you so much for giving us precious time in your busy schedule. We are truly honored by your presence. Thank you so much, sir. So now, next in the agenda, we have a Garo dance by Dhanand Sangma and his team. So may I request everyone to please be seated and enjoy the next cultural performance. Thank you.
Hello. 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 Check. Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third session, titled Blood of the Old Kings, Epic Fantasy Rebooted. So today we explore how epic fantasy is evolving, honoring its timeless themes of power, legacy, and destiny while embracing new storytelling innovations. So in today's session, we are honored to have with us Mr. Kung Il Kim, an acclaimed South Korean author known for his novel, Blood of the Old Kings, and I Will Go to Earth to See You, and the third novel, The Night of La Mancha. Now, he also has won an Excellence Award at the Korean Science Fiction Awards in 2018. Now, despite a lifelong passion for fiction, he began writing in his 40s and has since carved a unique space in fantasy, science fiction, and horror. We would like to have you on stage, sir. Welcome, sir. We would like to welcome you with a token of appreciation. I request to felicitate him with an Arunai. Moderating this session is Mr. Shubhadeep Paul. We would like you to have you on stage, sir. Sir will be guiding us through conversations on how epic fantasy is being reimagined for today's readers. So I also would like to welcome you, sir, with an Arunai. So together they will share insights on world building, character arcs, and the genre's evolving landscape. So let's dive into this journey where tradition meets transformation, bringing new life to epic fantasy. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Kulumbai, good afternoon, namaskar, and in Bangla, Shubhadeep Prohor. It's really a pleasure to moderate this particular session. We have with us a very prominent writer from Korea, from South Korea, to be more specific, Song Lee Kim. And I'll be kind of talking about with him regarding his very important publication which has come out, Blood of the Old Kings. And we have titled this session, Epic Fantasy Rebooted. So I guess many of you know what Sung does and the kind of writing he has been associated with for a long time. And this particular work is a very experimental work. It's a very fascinating piece of work, I should say.
Thank you.
And it has got a lot of very rare and rave reviews as I was checking it out. And so let's get the ball rolling. Let me begin by asking you regarding the genre, the category of the work, because these days publishers are very specific about categories. But one thing which I found out is that your work kind of, crosses over different categories and genres. And what particularly fascinated me is the idea that, this particular work has a historicity, a history behind it. There is a storyline, but it is also what has been termed as gas lamp fantasy or, fantasy speculation, speculative fiction. It's also science fiction partially, to an extent, I guess.
In a way, you could read it as science fiction, in a
As
way.
well, yeah.
Yes.
So your take on the kind of work that it is. Yeah.
Blood of the Old Kings was actually my debut novel, written way back in 2016. It was translated into English last year. So when I started, it was my first novel, and when I started it, I wanted to do everything that I could to fill the pages. And one of the ways was that to bring all the knowledge I had about different genres and use them to build story of my own. One of the genres that I used was, of course, the whole thing is basically epic fantasy. That's the basics. And as Mr. Paul just said, there is an element of science fiction in it, in terms of how the technological magic affects the society. That part that I borrowed from science fiction. And there's some traces of spy fiction and mystery in one of the major protagonist story arcs. And there is some horror, because there is, of course, horrible things that happen. So horror is one of the genres that I borrowed the technique from. So yes, it's a mix of a lot of things. And there are 3 protagonists, 3 points of views. And some people say it's like reading a different genre, or 3 in 1, you might say. But it was a conscious choice. And I think it works out pretty well.
That it does. Speaking about the generic part, I was also curious to ask you that, usually we find the epic as a format to be something very somber, to be something very serious. But fantasy is also something which leaves a lot of, scope for the imagination. Yes. It also has a kind of futuristic take on the way, the trajectory you are wanting to take your audience to. Oh. So what motivated you to blend these two together?
When you say epic fantasy, it's, well, it is an established genre, but what I did was mostly the epic part is, I think it has, just a minute.
Yeah, sure, take your time.
I think there are 2 sides to epic fantasy. One is the myths and legends. something that we can immediately identify in a story, because we are trained from the birth of civilizations to recognize myths and legends that we are familiar with. That is something fantasy books draws power from. But on the other hand, it's fantasy novels. Fantasy fiction is different from myths and legends because it has to incorporate new things. So it's fantasy, genre fantasy is always about building something on top of what readers already have, or what readers already know. So that's what I did here. We see three heroes, each going in different directions. They are taking different paths to achieve their destinies. And to each have, you will probably, when you read it, you will probably recognize that each have recognizable mythical or legendary paths that the heroes of the old has taken already. But their stories carry new things, and they represent new things. So it is both old and new. That's, I think, how fantasies usually work, and that's what I also focused on. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you. That's really experimental and bold an endeavor on your part. But you know, the way the work has been received, I've seen a lot of critics also very positively, identify it as a sort of a standalone. It is something that, kind of is a rare challenge to take up, fusing a story and, trying to make it symbolic as well. Would you tell a little bit about the storyline without giving away too much, but a little bit so that, the audience is inspired to
The
read
book
it?
really has three stories. One is about a conquered province of an empire. See, the empire has taken over this province and has oppressed it for 20 years. And one of the residents, just not a king or a prince, but just an ordinary woman, a middle-aged woman, who knows how to use sword a bit. And she goes through this hero's journey to become the king of the land and fight against the empire. That's one storyline. And the second storyline is about the sorcerer. It's a girl. This is a girl about 16 years old, and she has been taken to imperial capital because she's a sorcerer, and her fate is to be kept like an animal, not expected to do anything except to die and serve as a magical battery for the empire's war machine. She rejects that and runs away, and the only place she can go to is her homeland, the same place as the conquered province of the previous story. And the third story is about a refugee from that conquered province who has come to live in the imperial capital. And what he does is he wants to avenge his friend's death by investigating her murder. And in the process, he comes upon a conspiracy to destroy the imperial capital, basically a terrorist plot. These are three stories. They all hail from this conquered province, and they are all in different situations, but their situations are all the empire's making. So it's about those three people being in different situations and reacting to it and taking, taking initiative in their own way. So their stories don't overlap much, but each have different, because each person, each protagonist is in a different situation. They use different genre tropes. They use different kind of storylines. So I think that's what could be construed as experimental, as you said.
So, like, there are separate quests, but there is a singular kind of,
Yes.
end as well, if we might say. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Like this very idea of, toppling an evil empire, this
Oh,
itself is a very kind of challenging inspiration and aspiration alike. So I want to know how much of, the good-evil binary, because I deeply believe that most binaristic constructs, most binaries are part of, Western Manichaeanism. They have established everything in terms of black and white. So are you trying to look at other shades of gray, or you're trying to look at it differently?
I don't think in terms of black and white, and I don't think in terms of even shades of gray. I think there are just many, many colors. It's not just one, and there are not just two ends to this spectrum of morality or ethics. Everyone I talk to, they tell me that the empire that I've described is evil. But I didn't think that when I was writing it. I know that the people who are suffering under the oppression might think the empire is evil, but, well, imperialism can be said to be evil, of course, but they don't think of themselves that way, and they are too big to be just one single thing. All empires are. To the person who is beginning the rebellion, to the protagonist who's beginning the rebellion in her own homeland, the empire is nothing but evil. It's been described that way in her storyline. But the refugee from that same country, who is now living in the imperial capital, to him, the empire is not good, but it's not something that he thinks of as evil. It's just something that there is, and he ends up defending the imperial capital against this terrorist threat. So what I'm saying is, the empire itself is not. Okay, let me describe it this way. The reason I used 3 protagonists and 3 points of view was to view the empire in from three different angles. So you get a more. It's definitely not a force for good, the empire, but it's not just pure evil. It is. No empires are, in my opinion. It doesn't mean that there is some redeemable quality to imperialism. I'm not saying that. But the good and evil dichotomy is not a good model to view anything in. So that's one of the reasons I use 3 perspectives.
True. Wonderful. Yeah, so there's a particular quote, I guess, which fascinated me a lot. There is no escaping the empire. Even in death, you will serve.
Yes, that's one of the setting elements in this book and the sequels. Here, if you are born with magical talent, then in the old days, before the empire, you would learn spells and perform rituals and create magical effects, throw fireballs or something, or maybe look at the stars and tell fortunes. That's what you used to do. But the empire has forbidden all of that. And they collect all the sorcerers in the world from their childhood, and they keep them in the imperial capital, in the academy. And what they do with them is, when the sorcerers die, they mummify them and put them in special coffins to use as power sources. That's the only thing the empire uses the sorcerers for. This I put in because what empires do is they force a standard upon what they've conquered in the conquered lands, even on their own people, because that's easier to manage, and they want to be sure that they can use people's abilities not for their own good, but for its own benefit. That's exploitation. So the power generator, the sorcerer's corpses and boxes generating power forever, that's symbolic of how empires make a person into a cog in their great machine and use it for, and deny any sort of personal possibilities or personal power to them. So that was the symbolism or metaphor in that.
Right. So like this is something, I guess, even on a literal level, I found in several movies, even Indian movies, Bollywood movies, where, you know, like we have this take on the East India Company, the British East India Company, and when in movies like Mangal Pandey and other, there are several Indian movies talking about revolutionaries and their strives where, and it's mentioned that the individual is just a cog in the machine. This great, gigantic, indifferent empire.
Yes.
But is there anything good that comes out of this hegemonic control, or is it something that you feel should be retaliated?
Well,
Is systematic control in any way?
Something good. I mean, the people who benefit from, well, let's say, the East India Company. It was the most profitable company in the history of the world, maybe even till now.
Right.
So there was somebody profiting from it. So it must have been good for them, right?
Right.
So any system is run to do good to somebody while exploiting others. It's most noticeable in colonialism or any other kind of imperialism. But all systems, I found that it works that way. It benefits somebody and it penalizes others by exploiting them. So the cycle of exploitation is built into most world systems. And I really don't think there is any way out of them completely, but it can be challenged against. It can be, the damages can be dampened. So, no, I don't think there is an ultimate good that comes out of imperialist machine. But even during while the machine is working, somebody is profiting and somebody is being exploited. So it's good for somebody, I guess.
Right. There are certain, post-colonial and political critics. I'll just mention a couple of them. Like, for instance, Hartan Negri. They've written this wonderful book, Age of Empires, and then there's this, follow-up, which is Age of Democracy and stuff like that. So is there this pattern from empire to democracy? Would you like to talk about some of the political undertones or overtones of your work?
Oh, yes.
If you will.
Yeah. I think imperialism is still going on, and democracy, imperialism and democracy, I don't think they are mutually exclusive. Democracy is being talked about as some end state that we want to reach, but look at the British Empire. They touted themselves as democratic, even when because they were they had their parliaments, and because their monarch was not as influential in their politics. Say, Queen Victoria didn't have much say in how the British Empire was run. It was the parliament that did it. But so it was more democratic. than, say, under Queen Elizabeth I. But was it any better? Was it any less imperialistic? I don't think so. The trend continues. For instance, we can talk about American imperialism, and America is thought to be the beacon of democracy in the world, and in a way it is. Their domestic politics are very democratic, but that doesn't stop them from influencing the world in non-democratic ways. So age of empires ends and age of democracy begins. I don't think that's true, because imperialism is not just a specific school of thought that evil people follow. It's a way to profit, and everyone wants profit. So as long as we let them, it will stay and it will proliferate. So what we want to do is challenge that at every turn to dampen its effects and to ultimately slow it, but I think it will always be here.
Any kind of connection with the North and the South Korean divide or the different kinds of political system? Is there any ramification in your work?
It's not directly, it did not directly influence this book, but the third book that I've written but not published yet, it has some similarities. The North-South divide, it's a complicated situation. It's a remnant of the imperialism in the mid 20th century. Korea had always been one country until 1950 for at least 1,000 years. So there was no North Korea and South Korea until, say, about 80 years ago. It only came to be, North Korea and South Korea came to be because after fall of Japan in World War II, Korea was liberated, but the southern half was occupied by Americans, and the northern part was occupied by the Soviets. That is the only reason that there is a North and South Korea.
Right. I'll come to the fascinating aspects of the work as well, but this is something which has a kind of allegorical pattern to it, I might say, because allegories are helpful sometimes.
Yes.
It can be a national allegory as well. But one thing comes to my mind suddenly I'd like to share with you, which is this, that a long time back I read a particular work of criticism called The Anti-Chomsky Reader, where I guess it was written by a couple of academics from the United States itself, most possibly. So there was this pattern they were justifying to show that the pattern of democratic living in South Korea is far better. There was a lot of freedom, mobility, and stuff. And they were trying to justify that maybe a very ultra-leftist angle, as we find it, or a very militant or militaristic angle in the North was not really helping the masses. So, or do you find that, you wouldn't subscribe to this political divide? You would like to see Korea as a whole, as a total national or cultural entity?
Oh, I might have, say, until 20 years ago, North Korea and South Korea, the 80 years is a very long time, especially in this day and age. And while my father was born before the divide, North-South divide, and when I was very young, like in the 80s, we even had a song that our wish is reunification. It was a song everybody knew, and reunification was the most important political goal for both South and North. But of course, it doesn't happen because reunification means that only one government will survive, right? So we've reached at this point. And although we still have in our constitution, we do not recognize North Korea. and North Korean constitution does not recognize South Korea. But in all reality, we have become separate countries, different cultures, different political systems, and vastly different economies.
Right, right.
So I think it was in the 2000s that I began to see that people weren't really talking about reunification. And right now, the polls say that reunification would be probably a bit bad thing for South and North. So maybe we should just be two separate countries, but in a more peaceful way, like two friendly nations sharing a border.
Okay.
But there is so much hate between the two countries now. However we began this separation, it's very hard to think of a way that we can coexist in a completely peaceful way. And there are people who benefit from having a hostile neighbor, because whenever something happens, you can blame them. Right?
Okay, yeah. Okay, enough of politics. Let's come to the aesthetic part of your work. So, because too much of politics can be bothering anyway.
Well, the work is political.
Yeah, it is. But still, there is this political and polemical side to it as well. Well, we'll come to that later. Now, the thing is, like, let's talk about the characters. You know, like you have the three fascinating characters, and let's particularly talk about Lorraine. Okay,
Lorraine,
because I feel that Lorraine, singularly, Lorraine and Cain's connection together. Cain, by the way, did you have a biblical connect?
Biblical? Oh, no, not
No,
really.
not
I
that.
know Cain is a biblical name, but I just used it because of the sound.
It was random. Okay, fine. Okay. Now, would you tell us something about this, the speculative or the fantastic part? You know, this idea of the sword. I saw in the cover itself. The cover is very fascinating. You have the sword right in the middle, and you have the dragon, you know, toppling over from all directions. So, this symbology behind the sword made from the dragon's fang, you know, was that an ulterior purpose behind that?
Excuse me?
Was there a purpose behind that? You know,
Oh, yeah, the purpose. It's
the dragon's fang influencing the sword in some way.
in the first chapter, Loran goes in front of the dragon, which has lost when the empire invaded, and is kept as a captive in its own cave. Loran goes there and asks the dragons to help her get rid of the empire from her land. And the dragon asks, "So what are you?" And she's just a commoner. She has nothing. She is not a child of a king. She doesn't have a special birth. But she is still there because she has to do something about it. Her family had been killed, and she can only get rid of the sorrow by fighting, and she has no means to do it. So the dragon agrees. So the dragon breaks off one of its fangs and fashions a sword and gives to her. The idea is that she is chosen in this way by the dragon. It's supposed to give the reader that impression, but as the story goes by, it's revealed that the dragon's tooth is just a sword. It doesn't make her a king. It's something else. It's the people's support and her own determination that exalts her into being.
Is there also this angle, a respect for ancestry, a respect for heritage?
Oh, actually,
way?
that's exactly the thing that I want to deny.
Oh, you want to deny that, refute
Yes.
that idea? Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Right.
the title of the book, The Blood of the Old Kings, is because the dragon only grants audience to people with the blood of the old kings.
Yeah. That's
And, you know, the thing about blood is that it spreads everywhere. So in an old country, almost everybody would have the blood of the old kings.
right.
So that was the kind of irony. The title is a kind of ironical. So the ancestry part is the tradition, she respects her homeland. She wants to get it back from the empire, but she's a commoner, and she has risen to take the land back for her people. That's the respect she has for her own land. But she is not the child of a king. She is not chosen by anybody. She does it through her own determination. Yes.
Okay, right. Okay, Sung, like if you would like to speak about your literary influences, like for instance, I believe that there is a lot of aspects your work resonates to previous classical works. I find a lot of connection with the tragedy of blood in Elizabethan or Jacobean England at one point of time, because the idea of revenge or vengeance is very much there. And then Ursula Le Guin, or maybe a very quixotic characters, Don Quixote. So your literary influences, if you would like to speak about
It's
them.
very hard to list my influences because everything just mixes into it. And I particularly have, my biggest influence would be, in terms of prose, the kind of dry prose that I like to write, would be William Gibson.
Gibson.
Yes, he's a science fiction writer, famous for Neuromancer.
Neuromancer.
And I first came to his writing when I was a middle school student. And I've never encountered his kind of writing, his pace of prose. And that's something that I consciously try to replicate in Korean. I've read it in English, and as for other influences, you've mentioned Ursula Le Guin. Le Guin is also one of my favorite writers, and I think she did seep into my writing because there have been other critics and reviewers who've compared my writing to Le Guin's. And there are legends and mythologies, so numerous to list. Korean, Chinese, Greek, and Shakespeare always had a special spot. So if you discover something in there, that's probably not a coincidence.
That's a coincidence, yeah, right. Okay, let's come back to the characters once again, because that's how we get to talk about the work primarily. Ariane, if I'm
Yes.
spelling it,
Ariane,
pronouncing
yes.
it right, yeah. So, why is she called the power generator for the empire? You spoke a little bit about that, this idea about how, she becomes a sort of a power generator for the empire?
Oh, she doesn't want to become a power generator for the empire, but she escapes the academy to avoid the fate, because everyone else thinks that, well, you become a power generator when you're dead, so and you get pensions for life until you die. So for a lot of people, it's something that you just accept. Well, you live a good life, and what happens after you die, then it's nothing, that won't be a concern, right? But Ariane doesn't think so. She doesn't know if she is going to really die, and she doesn't know what's going to happen when she becomes a power generator. And she doesn't like to live a life where she is only expected to die, to be useful. So she escapes through the help of a dead sorcerer who is already a power generator and used to be a tyrant in a conquered province, province conquered by the empire. And he is a very evil man, but he helps Ariane escape, and he teaches her some magic that the academy wouldn't teach her. So, yeah, hers is a story of personal power and personal growth, and she ultimately, escapes. He kills her pursuers, and eventually she has to contend with the dead sorcerer that had been helping her for his own purpose.
Right, right. One more thing, I find there's a very wonderful double bind. Okay, how does that operate?
Double bind?
Because, on one hand, all this struggle, all this rebellion, it's ultimately to bring about a sort of normalcy at the end, a restoration of a certain kind of livable order. But you also mention, one of your quotes I'm pointing out, when peace is a lie, there is power in truth. So is that an advocacy for militant action or rebellion which is necessary, or?
I think sometimes militant action can be necessary.
Can be necessary.
Yes, because, well, peaceful demonstrations have gotten, well, let's say, when someone has an absolute power, then there is no use for peaceful protest. I mean, if you can just if there's no repercussions for just killing you all, then they will do it. They have done it. So sometimes militant actions is required for survival, not just for survival, but for just to, I don't know, just to tell the oppressors that you can't be, you can't just be, you won't just fall over and die. You have to fight back sometimes.
Wonderful. So even a small rebellion can topple down an empire in the long run.
In the long run, maybe, but in the book, what happens is they realize that they will never topple down the empire.
That's the realization.
Yes, that's a realization. But by fighting, even if they all die there, if they haven't fought there, then the next generation wouldn't either. But because they have fought and died, the people who come after them would be able to rise again, as you have already set an example. But what happens is that they all don't die there in the book, and they sort of come to a compromise where they still remain a province of the empire, but gain a great deal of autonomy. And I have heard that this is something that happened in Bodoland.
That's why I asked you the question, because there is a resonance, and I believe that such kinds of adjustments are necessary to make life more livable for
Yes.
everyone. I guess that's
There
the
is.
basic end and agenda, I guess. Okay, describe the dragon now. Let's come to the dragon,
Yes.
it's the most fascinating part of your work. But I find that it's a very sentient being, it's a very sentient being, very
Yes.
thinking being. It's not a typical, horror-inspiring mechanism only. So why does it treat the humans and kings on its own terms? The dragon has a very kind of, iconoclastic dealing mechanism. You have to listen to the dragon's terms and conditions.
Yes.
Why is that so, if you might speak?
Oh, because you have
Is
to...
it a kingmaker sort of it?
Oh, in the book, it was implied that it was actually an enemy of the people, but the first king of the